After 11 years of marriage, how could she?
The moment I saw her laughing with him through that restaurant window, I knew my marriage was already over. I just hadn't been told yet. But to understand how a single forgotten jacket unraveled 11 years of what I thought was a solid, honest life, I need to take you back to a cold February morning in Salt Lake City, when I reached behind some ski gear in my garage and pulled out something that wasn't mine, and nothing has been the same since. My name is Andy, and I work as a senior systems engineer at a mid-sized software firm in Salt Lake City. I've spent over a decade designing infrastructure solutions for companies that most people have never heard of, but whose products they use every day. I write code that prevents systems from falling over under load, build redundancies into architectures so that single points of failure don't become catastrophes, and spend a significant portion of my professional life anticipating the ways that things can go quietly wrong before anyone notices. It's precise, methodical work, and I've always believed that if you pay enough attention to the details, you can catch problems before they become irreversible. I should have applied the same principle to my marriage. For 11 of those years as an engineer, I've been married to Gloria, a sharp, composed woman I met at a mutual friend's birthday party back when we were both in our late 20s and convinced that the important decisions were already behind us. She worked in financial consulting, had a dry wit that took some people a while to understand, and made the best roast chicken I've ever eaten. We built a life together that looked, from the outside and from most angles on the inside, like something stable and well-constructed. We had 2 children, Mia, who is 8 and already more socially sophisticated than I was at 20, and Connor, who is 11 and deeply serious about basketball and the correct categorization of sandwiches. I thought I understood my life completely. I thought I understood Gloria. I thought the architecture of what we had built together was sound, tested, and reliable. Then, on a cold February morning, I found a jacket in our garage, and everything I believed about the structure of my life began to show its hidden cracks. It was the kind of Utah winter that settles into your bones within 30 seconds of stepping outside. Pale sky, dry cold, the mountains visible but distant and indifferent. I was looking for a snow scraper in the storage cabinet we keep beside the door to the house when I noticed it hanging on the far hook, almost hidden behind our ski gear and an old rain jacket of mine that I keep meaning to donate. A men's windbreaker, dark navy, the kind of technical outdoor jacket that costs $300 or $400 at a specialty shop and is built to last decades. It was not mine. I knew every piece of clothing in that garage, every jacket, every vest, every pair of gloves left behind after winter runs. This was a size XL, and I'm a medium. More telling than the size, it carried a faint but distinct smell, a cologne I didn't recognize, something cedar-forward and deliberate, the kind of fragrance a person chooses carefully. I stood in the garage for a long moment, holding the jacket and turning it over in my hands. I checked the pockets, empty, and the collar, no name, no tag beyond the brand label. I carried it inside and laid it on the kitchen table. My hands were already moving faster than my thoughts, and my thoughts were moving very fast. When Gloria came home from work that evening, I pointed to it and kept my voice carefully neutral. "Whose jacket is this?" "I found it out in the garage on the back hook." She set her work bag down on the counter and barely glanced at the jacket before answering. "Oh, that's Robert's. You know Patricia from my office? Her brother came with us when she drove me to the Riverdale Outlet Mall last Saturday. He must have left it behind when he dropped something off afterward." She said it easily, with the smooth matter-of-factness of someone relating an entirely ordinary piece of information, and then she moved toward the refrigerator to start thinking about dinner. Her calmness was the thing I kept returning to afterward. Not guilt, not hesitation, not the micro-pause that people exhibit when they're constructing a story rather than recalling one. Just easy, untroubled explanation, delivered the way you'd tell someone what time a movie starts. Patricia worked with Gloria at the regional office of a financial consulting firm downtown. They had lunched together occasionally, knew each other well enough to be friendly. The explanation wasn't impossible on its face. But the jacket was clearly a man's, not a unisex cut, not something borrowed casually. And the cologne on it was strong enough to be intentional, the cologne of a man who wore it regularly and whose presence lingered. That night, lying in bed while Gloria slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to be rational. People forget things. Brothers of coworkers do exist. I was constructing a crisis from a piece of outerwear, and that was the kind of paranoia I associated with men who had already decided something was wrong and were working backward from the conclusion. I told myself to wait. I told myself to think clearly. And then, the next day during my lunch break, I drove across town to Gloria's office building and went looking for Patricia. I found Patricia in the building's break room on the 4th floor, sitting at one of the small round tables with a container of leftover pasta and her phone propped against a water bottle. She recognized me immediately. We'd met twice at company events, and her face opened into a friendly, slightly puzzled smile as I came in. I introduced myself again for formality's sake, held up the jacket, and explained that Gloria had asked me to return it. I watched Patricia's expression as I said this. There was no flicker of recognition, no moment of, "Oh yes, of course." Instead, her brow furrowed with genuine confusion, the kind that arrives in the muscles before the mind has fully processed it. "That's not mine," she said. "And my brother lives in Nevada. He hasn't been in Salt Lake City in at least 3 months." She tilted her head slightly, concern starting to replace the confusion. "Is everything okay? Did something happen?" I told her there must have been a mix-up, that I'd probably misunderstood who Gloria had mentioned, that it wasn't a big deal. I thanked her for her time and left the break room as calmly as I could manage. In the elevator going down, I had to press my back against the wall just to feel something solid. The floor number descended on the display, 432 lobby, and by the time the doors opened I had assembled the facts into their simplest and most unavoidable form. Gloria had looked me in the eyes and told me a detailed, specific, entirely false story without a single tremor of hesitation. That evening I said nothing. I watched Gloria move through our house with complete apparent normalcy, helping Mia with a worksheet about the water cycle, arguing good-naturedly with Connor about whether he'd done enough practice before asking to watch television, loading the dishwasher while we talked about something unremarkable that happened in my day. She was so thoroughly herself, or the version of herself I had always understood, that sitting across from her at the dinner table felt like an experience of double vision. Here was the woman I had been married to for 11 years, laughing at something Connor said. And here also was a woman who had lied to my face without difficulty. I could not yet reconcile these into a single coherent person. I began, over the following days, to pay attention differently. Not in the dramatic way of someone conducting a formal investigation. I wasn't going through drawers or checking phone records, but in the way of someone who has been told that a system is behaving strangely and is now watching it more carefully. I noticed things I had been too busy, too comfortable, or too uninterested to notice before. Gloria was staying later at the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays, citing client deadlines with a tiredness that now struck me as performed. She had joined a yoga studio in early March, which she mentioned once and never brought up again. No enthusiasm, no schedule comparison, no asking whether I'd want to try it. Her phone, which had for years sat charging on the kitchen counter through the evening, now traveled everywhere with her, its screen always face down. One evening I was sitting on the couch reading, when her phone buzzed on the cushion beside her. The notification preview read, * looking forward to Wednesday. We should try that new, * before the screen locked. She picked it up immediately, glanced at it, and set it back down without commenting. I watched her face. There was nothing, no blush, no careful stillness, just the ordinary expression of someone who has read a message and will attend to it later. That was perhaps the most frightening thing. Not guilt, but the complete absence of any visible weight. I didn't say anything. I sat with it, the way you sit with a line of code that you know is wrong but can't yet identify the error in. I needed more information before I said anything irreversible. The discovery that confirmed everything came on a Wednesday in late March, in the most ordinary possible way. I had driven across town to meet a potential business partner at a restaurant called the Meridian, a new upscale place near the financial district that a mutual colleague had recommended as a good setting for a working lunch. I'd been looking forward to the meeting. The project we were discussing was interesting, the kind of architectural challenge I find genuinely engaging. I was thinking about network topology and latency trade-offs as I pulled into the parking lot, and then I saw our dark green SUV parked 3 rows from the entrance. My chest tightened immediately, the way it does when you're running a system check and an unexpected process appears in the output. Something that shouldn't be there, something that your experience tells you represents a problem even before you fully understand what it's doing. I sat in my car for a moment. The most reasonable explanation, I told myself, was that Gloria had a client lunch here. The Meridian was exactly the kind of place that financial consultants used for client entertainment. There was nothing inherently alarming about her car being in this parking lot. I walked toward the entrance. Through the wide front windows of the restaurant, exposed brick, low pendant lighting, white tablecloths that caught the early afternoon light, I could see the interior with reasonable clarity. And there, at a corner table positioned slightly away from the surrounding tables in the way that couples choose when they want privacy, was Gloria. She was sitting across from a man I had never seen. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark blazer over a light shirt. He was leaning forward with his forearms on the table, and she was leaning toward him, and the distance between them across that table was the distance of people who are comfortable with each other, not the managed space of a professional meeting. She was laughing, not the polite laugh she used at industry events, not the exhausted laugh she produced when something mildly funny happened at the end of a long day. Something open and unguarded, real in a way that I realized, standing outside looking through glass, I hadn't seen in a long time. The man was smiling at her with the particular expression of someone who knows they're the reason for the laugh. I did not go in. I stood to one side of the entrance, partially concealed by a menu display board, and I took photographs with my phone, careful, steady, as many angles as the distance allowed. I was operating on a kind of calm that I understand now was shock, the shutdown of effect that the nervous system produces when the emotional load becomes briefly unmanageable. I documented methodically for 20 minutes. When they stood to leave, the man held Gloria's coat for her, his hands resting on her shoulders for a moment longer than necessary. They kissed on the sidewalk outside, not a brief, friendly goodbye, but a long and unhurried kiss that made clear this was not a new arrangement and that neither of them was concerned about being seen. I sat in my car in the parking lot long after they had left. My phone was in my hand. On the screen were photographs of my wife kissing a man I didn't recognize, in a restaurant I'd never been to, on a Wednesday afternoon. I drove home without remembering much of the route. His name, as I would discover through a careful reverse image search using one of the clearer photographs I'd taken, was Daniel Varrow. A real estate developer based in Salt Lake City, recently separated from his wife, regularly covered in local business news for a series of high-end residential projects along the Wasatch Front. He appeared in a number of professional photographs from industry events, always well-dressed, always at the center of a group, always with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any given room. He was connected, prominent, and apparently quite successful. He was also, I would eventually understand, operating in considerably darker territories than commercial real estate. I did what I imagine most people in my position do in the immediate aftermath. I functioned. I went to work. I attended my meetings and reviewed my team's code and made decisions about server architecture and responded to emails with appropriate speed and courtesy. I came home and helped Mia with her school project about deep-sea creatures and argued with Connor about whether a fish taco constituted a real taco or a hybrid category of its own. I ate dinners across from Gloria and listened to her talk about her week and said the appropriate things in the appropriate places. Inside, I was conducting a different kind of assessment entirely. I researched divorce law. I read about asset division in Utah, about custody arrangements and their various structures, about what documentation tends to be relevant in proceedings. I thought about the house, whether I wanted to stay in it, whether the children's stability argued for one of us remaining, and about the financial picture, which was reasonably uncomplicated given that we had always kept somewhat separate accounts. I thought about Connor and Mia constantly, in the background of every other thought, the way a monitoring process runs beneath everything else in a system. Checking. 3 weeks after seeing Gloria and the man at the Meridian, I visited an attorney named Leonard Graves, someone I'd known since graduate school who had built a respected family law practice in the city. I told him everything, the jacket, the lie, Patricia's denial, the photographs, the pattern I had documented over the preceding weeks. Leonard was measured and careful, which I had always appreciated about him. He didn't editorialize and he didn't perform sympathy. He listened, asked several precise clarifying questions, and then told me what I needed to know about the practical landscape ahead. Utah allows fault-based considerations in certain proceedings, he said, and what you've documented will be useful. But the more important question is what outcome you're trying to achieve, for the children especially. That should shape how we approach this. He was right, and I told him so. I didn't want to punish Gloria. I wanted to protect the children from unnecessary turbulence and to arrive, as efficiently as possible, at a new arrangement that was honest. I signed the preliminary documents that afternoon. The pen moved without drama. My hand was steady. My understanding of my own life, however, was undergoing a reorganization so fundamental that I hadn't yet found the bottom of it. Then something happened that I could not have anticipated, and that changed the entire shape of what followed. The week after I signed Leonard's documents, Gloria's aunt, her mother's older sister, who had helped raise Gloria through her teenage years after her parents' divorce, called the house in considerable distress. Her husband of over 2 decades had been discovered in a long-running affair with someone from his professional circle. The revelation had devastated the extended family. Gloria arranged to fly to Portland for 5 days to provide support, canceling several work commitments to do it. Before she left, standing in the hallway near the front door with her travel bag over her shoulder, she hugged me and said, with unmistakable sincerity in her voice, "I don't understand how people do this to each other. 20 years together, and I don't understand how someone can look at a person every day and lie like that." I nodded. I said something about how she should take all the time she needed. I watched her car reverse out of the driveway, and then I stood in the hallway of our house for a long time, listening to the particular quality of silence that follows a departure. Gloria returned from Portland on a Tuesday evening looking different. Not guilty. I had been braced for guilt, for the visible discomfort of someone who has been reminded of their own transgression by someone else's experience. But she didn't look guilty. She looked rattled in a deeper way, the way someone looks when something has forced them to confront something they had been successfully avoiding. She put her bag down in the hallway, kissed the kids, and then after they had gone upstairs she sat across from me at the kitchen table and didn't say anything for almost a full minute. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything. Please." What she told me over the next hour was not the story I had been expecting. She admitted everything I already knew. The relationship with Daniel Varrow, its duration, the lie about the jacket, the accumulated deceptions of the preceding months. She said this with a directness that was painful to receive and that I nonetheless respected, because it was the first wholly honest thing she had said to me in a very long time. But then she told me the part one hadn't known, the part that reframed everything that had come before. The relationship had shifted, she said, roughly 4 months earlier. What had begun as an affair had become something considerably more frightening. When she had tried to end things with Varrow in January, he had shown her what he had accumulated: recordings of their conversations, phone calls, private exchanges, and photographs. He had been documenting the relationship from early on, she believed, with precisely this moment in mind. He told her that if she left him, or if she told me, or if she spoke to anyone about his business activities, he would ensure her professional reputation in the financial community was destroyed, that the recordings would reach the appropriate people, that she would not recognize her own life by the time he was finished. He had been specific about this. He had been calm about it. That calmness, she said, was the most frightening part. She showed me a text message he had sent 6 weeks earlier. I read it carefully. It was detailed, precise, and entirely credible as a threat. It was written by someone who had made similar threats before and understood how to make them land. "I've been trying to figure out how to get out," she said. Her voice was steady in the way that voices are steady when a person has already used up their available emotion and is now operating on something quieter and more resolute. "I didn't know how to tell you what I'd gotten into without losing everything. I kept thinking I could find a way out on my own, that I could manage it. But I can't." I sat with everything she had said. The anger I had been carrying for weeks was still present, but it had been joined by something more complicated, a recognition that what I was looking at was not simply betrayal, but betrayal that had been exploited and weaponized by someone who apparently had considerable experience doing exactly that. "We need to talk to the authorities," I said. "I can't go to the local police," she said immediately. "He told me he has people there. I don't know if that's true, but I can't risk finding out." I spent that night awake, assembling what I knew. Over the following days I did my own research on Daniel Varrow, not just the business news coverage I'd already found, but the less visible record. State audit documents available through public records requests. Court filings from his divorce proceedings, some of which had been settled under seal, but whose procedural records still contained useful information. References in financial news to an ongoing investigation into irregularities in his development projects. A pattern of connections, documented across multiple sources, to investment groups based in Eastern Europe whose principles were difficult to research and whose activities were difficult to characterize. I reached out to a contact I had through my professional network, a woman named Dr. Elaine Marsh, who consulted on digital forensics for law firms and government agencies, and had previously spent a decade working with federal investigators on financial crimes. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near the university campus one evening that week, and I told her everything. Varrow has been a subject of interest in a financial crimes investigation for approximately 18 months, she told me, after listening carefully. He's been extremely careful about maintaining distance from anything directly traceable. The people looking at him have had significant difficulty establishing a clean chain of evidence. She paused. If your wife has had direct access to his private communications and his confidence, that's potentially very significant. Another pause. It also means she's in real danger if he believes she might become a liability. I brought Dr. Marsh's assessment to Gloria that evening. The conversation that followed was the most difficult one of my life, more difficult, in certain ways, than the confrontation I had been preparing for when I thought this was only about betrayal. We talked until nearly 2 a.m. Gloria was frightened. She was also beneath the fear, angry, a clean, focused anger directed at herself and at Varrow and at the situation, the kind of anger that is more useful than despair because it has a direction. If I cooperate with investigators, she said, and he finds out before they have enough to arrest him, he's going to come after you regardless, I said. The question is whether you give anyone the tools to stop him before he does. She argued with this. She questioned it, examined it from different angles, pushed back against it with the analytical precision that had made her good at her job. This went on for 3 evenings. On the 4th evening, she said, "All right." Through Dr. Marsh's contacts, the cooperation was arranged with federal investigators under carefully negotiated conditions: immunity from any financial exposure related to Varrow's activities, active protection for the children, and a structured approach that would allow Gloria to gather additional evidence without placing herself in acute and immediate danger. The investigators were, according to Dr. Marsh, cautiously excited, which is apparently how federal investigators express what the rest of us would call considerable enthusiasm. For the 2 months that followed, I lived in a sustained state of anxiety that I don't have adequate language for. Every evening that Gloria left the house to meet Varrow, wearing a recording device provided by the investigators, carrying a cover story, performing the role of a woman still under his control, I remained at home with Connor and Mia, and helped with homework and made dinners and answered questions about whether everything was okay with a consistency that required more effort than anything I've done professionally. Connor asked me once, during this period, whether Mom and I were going through something. He is 11 and observant in the quiet way of children, who are paying more attention than adults tend to account for. I told him that adults sometimes had complicated things to work through, and that it had nothing to do with him or Mia, that both his parents loved both of them very much, that some things take time. He nodded and went back to his homework. I don't know if he believed me entirely. I think he chose to accept it, which is its own kind of sophistication. Gloria always came home. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening in early June. Varrow had invited Gloria to dinner at his home, a private occasion, apparently a habit he had when he felt confident and comfortable. Over the course of the evening, according to the recordings, he spoke at length about a network of city officials he maintained on retainer, about the offshore accounts routed through shell companies registered in 3 different countries, about his relationship with a group of investors whose activities were under active investigation in multiple jurisdictions. He was drinking and he was at ease, and he apparently believed himself entirely safe. Gloria had remained composed throughout, had asked questions in the natural way of someone engaged in conversation, had allowed him to keep talking. Federal agents executed coordinated warrants within 72 hours. Varrow was arrested at his home at 6 a.m, along with 9 associates across the city. The evidence Gloria had gathered was comprehensive enough that his attorneys apparently advised early cooperation, and within 2 weeks he had entered into an agreement with prosecutors rather than face the full weight of the charges against him. It was by any measure a significant collapse of something that had apparently been operating for years under the surface of ordinary Salt Lake City business life. None of this repaired our marriage. I want to be clear about that, because the narrative pull of the situation creates a pressure toward a certain kind of resolution, and that resolution did not happen. Gloria had done something genuinely courageous in the end. She had also deceived me for over a year, and constructed elaborate lies with impressive ease, and made choices that had placed our family in danger that I hadn't known about and hadn't consented to. Both of these things were true simultaneously, and I had to learn, slowly, over months, to hold them both without resolving one into the other. The divorce proceeded through the summer and into the fall with a minimum of acrimony, which in some ways was harder than conflict would have been. Anger provides its own kind of scaffolding. The absence of anger left me with only the bare structure of loss. We divided assets carefully and agreed on a custody arrangement that centered the children's routines as much as possible. I kept the house. Gloria moved into an apartment across town, close enough that school pickups and drop-offs were manageable and the kids could see their friends from both locations. During one of our final mediation sessions, Gloria looked at me across the conference table and said, "I know there's nothing I can say that changes what I did, but I want you to understand that I know what I did. All of it. Not just the affair, the lying. The way I looked at you and lied without difficulty. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what that says about who I was becoming, and I don't like what I see." She paused. "I'm trying to become someone different." I asked her, because I had carried the question for months, why she had gotten involved with Varrow in the first place. She was quiet for a moment. "I felt like I had disappeared," she said finally. "Not dramatically, not all at once. Just gradually over years. Everything we did was oriented around logistics, the kids' schedules, the house, work, finances. I stopped feeling like a person with an interior life and started feeling like a function that the household required. And when someone came along who was interested in me, not in the schedule, not in the logistics, just in me, in what I thought and what I wanted, I made a catastrophic choice in response to that feeling." She met my eyes. "I know it wasn't your fault that I felt that way. I know I should have told you. I didn't, and I can't undo that." I spent a long time with that afterward, not to excuse what she had done, but because I recognized something true in what she described. There had been years, several of them, if I'm fully honest, where I had been more present to my work than to my marriage. Not maliciously, not with any conscious decision to withdraw, but through the accumulated weight of 1,000 small choices about where to direct attention when everything was competing for it. I don't believe that caused what happened. But I stopped, somewhere in that period after the mediation session, pretending that our marriage had been a healthy thing that had been ambushed from the outside. It had been a thing with its own quiet structural problems, and neither of us had attended to them. A year after the divorce was finalized, Dr. Marsh called me with 2 pieces of information. The first was that Varrow had died in custody. The official determination was a cardiac event, though the circumstances were considered suspicious by investigators who believed his former associates had reached him. The threat he had represented was, in any practical sense, eliminated. The second was something she had uncovered in the course of the broader investigation, a pattern in Varrow's history stretching back at least 4 years. He had cultivated relationships with at least 6 women in similar circumstances, all married, all professionally accomplished, all in situations that suggested some degree of marital strain that a careful and attentive person could identify and exploit. In each case, the relationship had followed a similar arc: flattery, intimacy, documentation, coercion. He had refined the approach over years into something systematic. "This doesn't absolve her choices," Dr. Marsh said carefully, in the way of someone who has thought about how to say a thing before saying it. "But it gives you the full picture." I appreciated both parts of that sentence. My life now is quieter than it was, and better in ways that are hard to articulate without sounding like I'm performing a kind of contentment I don't actually feel. The truth is more complicated. It is genuinely better in some respects and genuinely harder in others, and I've stopped expecting those 2 things to cancel each other out. I see Mia and Connor on alternating weeks and every Wednesday evening. We cook together. Mia has developed a genuine interest in baking, which creates a significant amount of flour-related mess, and watch films and have the arguments that families have, the ongoing ones about reasonable bedtimes and the taxonomy of sandwiches. I am more present with them than I was when we all lived under the same roof, which is a strange and uncomfortable truth that I've had to learn to simply acknowledge rather than explain away. I've been seeing someone for about 8 months. Her name is Dana, and she teaches high school history and has 2 teenagers of her own and a sense of humor that is simultaneously dry and kind, which is a combination I've come to think is quite rare. We are careful with each other, not timid, but deliberate, in the way that people who have been through significant things tend to be deliberate about new ones. It is not what I had with Gloria in the beginning, when everything was unexamined and uncomplicated. It is something different, more considered, more intentional, and I think that's appropriate. Gloria is doing well, from what I understand through the mediated channels we use. She moved to a different city as part of her ongoing cooperation arrangement, and communication is structured and infrequent. She writes occasionally, brief, careful notes that tell me she's working, that she's in therapy, that she's trying. She has never asked me to think better of her than I do. I find that I do anyway, more than I expected to. Connor asked me last spring, on a long drive back from a tournament, whether I thought his mom was a bad person. He's 12 now, and asking the real questions with the directness of someone who has decided that softened versions don't serve him. I told him what I actually believe, that she made serious mistakes with serious consequences, and that she also, when it mattered, did something genuinely courageous. That people are almost never just one thing. That you can love someone and recognize clearly that you cannot build a life with them. He sat with that for a while, watching the highway, and then asked whether I was happy. I told him honestly that I was getting there. The navy jacket is gone. I gave it to a donation bin months ago, without ceremony. I've thought about that choice since. Maybe I should have kept it, the way certain objects become useful reminders of the lessons that cost the most to learn. But I found as time passed that I didn't need a physical object to carry what the jacket represented. What I found that February morning, and everything that followed from it, is present with me in a more complete way than any piece of clothing could hold. What I know now, which I did not know then, is this: a marriage is not a state that you achieve and then maintain passively like a file that saves automatically. It's something you rebuild continuously through attention and honesty, and the willingness to name the things that are going wrong before they go wrong past the point of recovery. We didn't do that. By the time the jacket appeared, we had already been quietly failing each other for years, each of us waiting, perhaps, for the other to say something first. Neither of us did. And so the failing continued, below the visible surface of a life that looked, from most angles, entirely functional. I am not waiting anymore. I've learned to say the difficult things in the moment they arise, rather than carrying them until they become something heavier and less manageable. I've learned that honesty, even the kind that destabilizes something you've invested in, is the only foundation that actually bears weight over time. Everything else is a comfortable story you tell yourself, and tell the people you love, until something falls out of a cabinet and you are forced to look clearly at what was always there. Thank you for watching the video to the end. YouTube may no longer suggest my channel to you, so subscribe to it to receive new interesting stories. You will also help the channel grow and improve the quality of its content. A playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to is now displayed on the screen. You can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.